The titans of the old world are awakening from their digital slumber, ready to reclaim the glory they once lost to time. Witness the epic scale of a return that will shake the very foundations of the modern world. Click subscribe now and be there for the return of the giants. I spent 22 years in the United States Army. 18 of those years were with the 75th Ranger Regiment, and the last 4 were somewhere I'm still not allowed to talk about in detail. What I can tell you is that I've been in rooms where the air itself felt wrong, where every second required a decision, and where hesitation meant someone didn't come home. I've watched good men die for reasons that got classified before their families even learned their sons were gone. I came home to Clarksville, Tennessee in the spring of 2019. I was 38 years old, had a Purple Heart I kept in a drawer, and a daughter named Avery who was about to turn 17. I'd missed most of her childhood. Birthday parties, school plays, the first time she got on a bike without training wheels. All of it happened while I was somewhere else, doing something I couldn't talk about. Her mother, my ex-wife Teresa, had raised her almost entirely alone, and she'd done a better job than I deserved credit for. Avery was smart, disciplined. She had this quiet confidence about her that I recognized, not because she got it from me, but because she'd built it herself the hard way, without a father around. After the divorce finalized in 2017, Teresa remarried and moved to Portland. Avery chose to stay in Tennessee when she aged out of the custody arrangement. She stayed because of school, she said. She stayed because she'd built a life there. I think she also stayed because she wanted to give me a chance to be her father before it was too late for both of us. That's the kind of person she is. She extended grace she didn't owe me. By the fall of 2021, Avery was enrolled at Whitfield University, a private school about 40 minutes east of Nashville. Good school about 40 minutes east of Nashville. Good school. Expensive school, the kind of place where the parking lot outside the freshman dorms looks like a luxury car dealership. She was on partial academic scholarship, working part-time at the university library and studying pre-law. She called me every Sunday. We'd gotten into a rhythm, the two of us. I was relearning how to be a father, and she was patient with my learning curve in a way that broke my heart a little every single time. I remember the exact moment my phone rang on a Tuesday night in October. It was 11:47 p.m. I was still awake because I don't sleep well, haven't since 2009. And probably won't ever again. The number was campus security at Whitfield. They told me there had been an incident involving my daughter and that I should come to Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville as soon as possible. They used the word incident. I remember thinking, in that very calm, compartmentalized way that training builds into you, that the word incident was doing a lot of work in that sentence. Incident could mean a lot of things. When I got to the emergency room and spoke to the attending physician, I understood that incident meant this. Avery had been followed from the library to her dorm by 3 men. They'd waited until she was on a stretch of path with no cameras, no witnesses, and no lighting. 2 of them held her down. The third one had a lacrosse stick. He hit her across the face twice. Her cheekbone was fractured. Her orbital socket was cracked. 3 of her teeth were broken at the root. She had a concussion and internal bruising along her left jaw that the doctor said might affect her ability to eat normally for months. She was conscious when I got there. She looked at me from the hospital bed with one eye swollen almost completely shut, and she said, "I'm okay, Dad." She wasn't okay. But she said it like she meant it. Like she was trying to hold herself together for me, which is exactly the opposite of how it should have been. I held her hand and I didn't say anything for a long time. There was a lot running through my mind in those minutes. A systematic, very detailed catalog of possibilities that I pushed back into a locked room and left there. I told her she was safe. I told her I wasn't going anywhere. I asked her what she remembered. She told me their names. She'd recognized one of them before they pulled the masks down. Bowen Aldridge. He was a junior, the starting midfielder on the lacrosse team, and his father, Clifton Aldridge, was a state senator who'd been in office since before Avery was born. The other 2 were his teammates, a pair named Tatum Groves and Ridley Marsh, all 3 from families with money, old enough to have buildings named after it on the Whitfield campus. Avery told me she'd seen Bowen watching her at the library for 2 weeks. She'd filed a report with campus security about it. The report had been logged and never followed up on. The police came to the hospital that night. I was professional with them, cooperative. I gave them every name Avery had given me, and I made sure they understood. I expected them to do their jobs. The detective, a tired-looking man named Kellison, told me they'd look into it. He said it with the flat affect of someone who already knew how the math was going to work out. Within 48 hours, I found out he was right. Bowen Aldridge's father had a defense attorney in that police station before the preliminary interviews were even concluded. Not a defense attorney, a firm. 4 people with briefcases and matching expressions of controlled condescension. By the end of the first week, the narrative had shifted. The university issued a statement about their commitment to campus safety that managed to never mention Avery once. The Aldridge family's attorney called my attorney. I'd hired one immediately, and used the phrase, a complicated social situation between students with what I can only describe as rehearsed sincerity. Then Senator Clifton Aldridge appeared on a Nashville television news segment. I watched it on my phone in the hospital parking lot, which is where I'd been spending a lot of time because the inside of Avery's room made me feel like the walls were pressing in. The senator sat across from an anchor and described his son as a good young man being caught up in allegations by someone with a history of seeking attention. He didn't say Avery's name. He didn't have to. Everyone watching knew exactly who he was talking about. I watched it twice. Then I put my phone in my jacket pocket and I sat in my truck for 45 minutes without moving. I want to be very clear about something. I did not act. Not then. Because I have spent a significant portion of my adult life learning the difference between a feeling and a decision, between what you want to do and what you should do. I had been trained extensively in the understanding that patience and discipline are not weaknesses. They are the most powerful tools available. So I sat in that truck and I made a choice. I was going to let the system work. I was going to exhaust every legitimate option before I considered any other kind. I hired a second attorney, a civil litigator named Harmon who'd handled Title IX cases and had a reputation for not being impressed by money. He filed with the university. He filed with the district attorney's office. I hired a private investigator, a former CID agent I'd known for years, to document everything independently. I drove to the county courthouse myself and sat in the public gallery during preliminary hearings, suit and tie, watching. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to understand that I was paying attention and that I was not going to quietly accept anything. What followed over the next 4 months was the most dispiriting education of my adult life. The university's Title IX coordinator, a woman who spoke entirely in bureaucratic, passive voice and never once made eye contact, concluded after a 6-week review that there was insufficient evidence to determine a policy violation. She sent her findings in a PDF with the university logo at the top. Harmon filed an appeal. The appeal was reviewed by a committee that included 2 members of the university's board of trustees, one of whom, I later discovered, had co-chaired a fundraising gala with Senator Aldridge 3 years running. The appeal was denied. The criminal case moved toward a plea. The district attorney's office, under pressure I couldn't prove but could feel the way you can feel barometric change before a storm, offered Bowen Aldridge and his 2 friends a diversion agreement. No conviction, community service, mandatory counseling, expungement after 18 months of clean compliance. The DA's office called it proportionate to the evidence available. Harmon called me to tell me about it on a Thursday afternoon. I remember I was in my kitchen, and after I hung up the phone, I stood at the counter for a long time without doing anything. Avery was back in school by then. She'd gone back because she said she refused to let them take that from her, too. She was attending classes with a retainer on her bottom teeth and a hairline fracture in her cheekbone that the oral surgeon said would ache in cold weather for the rest of her life. She called me on Sunday like always. I never told her how close I was to the edge during those months. I didn't want her to carry that. The call came in February. It was a number I didn't recognize. A man's voice, Smooth, accustomed to being listened to, the kind of voice that belongs to someone who has never been told no by anyone who mattered. He introduced himself as Clifton Aldridge. He said he was calling as a courtesy. He said that the situation had been handled, and that it would benefit everyone involved if I accepted that and moved forward. He said that Avery was a bright young woman with a future, and that it would be a shame if certain questions about her character and her history became part of the public record. He said, and I'm giving you the precise words here because I wrote them down the moment the call ended. Some doors, once you knock on them, don't stay closed the way you'd want them to. I let him finish. I said, Senator, I want to thank you for calling me directly. I said it the way I say a lot of things in situations like that. Completely level. Completely without effect, the voice I use when I'm doing something that requires absolute precision. He seemed pleased by my response. He told me I seemed like a reasonable man. I was already recording the call. What the senator didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 2 weeks earlier I'd filed a request through a contact I still had in federal law enforcement to run a background check on Tatum Groves and Ridley Marsh. What came back was interesting. Tatum Groves had a sealed juvenile record in Virginia involving an assault charge that had been expunged through a private agreement between families. Ridley Marsh's father sat on the board of a regional bank that had issued a substantial loan to the Whitfield University Endowment Fund 3 years prior, with terms significantly below market rate, approved by a committee that included the same trustee who had denied Avery's Title IX appeal. I spent 6 weeks building a file, not doing anything with it. Just building it. Dates, names, transaction records that were technically public, but buried deep enough that nobody bothered to look. Meeting minutes from university board sessions, donation records, campaign finance disclosures. Senator Aldridge had received 3 separate contributions from holding companies connected to the Marsh family, totaling $340,000 over the previous election cycle. All legal, all disclosed in documents no one ever reads. I gave copies of everything to Harmon. I gave copies to a journalist at the Tennessean who covered higher education and had written critically about Whitfield's Title IX record twice in the previous 3 years. I gave copies to a congressman from the neighboring district who sat on an education oversight subcommittee and who had, as it happened, been publicly critical of Senator Aldridge on unrelated matters. I did not tell any of these people what I was about to do next. I just made sure the information existed in multiple places, with multiple people, before I took any other steps. Then I turned my attention to the 3 young men. I'm not going to describe every detail of what happened over the following 3 weeks. Some of it I won't say for legal reasons. Some of it I won't say because it's not necessary. What matters is the outcome, and the outcome is what it is. What I will tell you is that everything I did within the knowledge that I was operating in a space I had chosen deliberately and that I had accounted for every variable I could account for. The way I'd been trained to account for variables in environments that were far more consequential. Owen Aldridge was found by his teammates early on a Saturday morning near the Lacrosse practice facility, with both wrists broken, a dislocated shoulder, and 4 fractured ribs. He told the police he'd been attacked by someone he couldn't identify. He described them as moving in a way that didn't seem right, like the person wasn't afraid of anything at all. The police investigated. They found nothing. Tatum Groves had an encounter of a similar nature approximately 8 days later, in the parking garage beneath his off-campus apartment building. 2 broken fingers, a fractured kneecap, a separated shoulder. He also told police he couldn't identify his attacker. He said the whole thing lasted less than 40 seconds and that whoever it was hadn't said a single word the entire time. Ridley Marsh left Whitfield University before his encounter. He withdrew from school and his family relocated him to a relative's property in Montana. The word had gotten out, apparently, in the way that words do in closed communities. He understood what was coming and he chose to run. Running was the right decision for him. I respected it. I had made arrangements regardless, but the arrangements became unnecessary. What happened next? The legal and institutional fallout unfolded over the following 8 months without any further involvement for me. The journalist at the Tennessean published a 3-part series on Whitfield University's Title IX processes, the board members' financial connection to the Marsh family, and a broader pattern of cases in which wealthy students had received favorable treatment during misconduct proceedings. It ran in April. The university president announced a review. The board member resigned in May, citing personal reasons. The congressman's subcommittee opened a preliminary inquiry into Whitfield's federal Title IX compliance in June. Senator Clifton Aldridge announced in September that he would not seek re-election, citing his family's need for privacy during a difficult time. The recording of his call to me had been provided to Harmon and to the journalist. It never became public evidence in a criminal proceeding, but it existed, and certain people knew it existed, and that knowledge had its own weight. Aldridge was also dismissed from Whitfield following the publication of the Tennessean series and a subsequent reopening of the university's Title IX investigation under new administration. He did not face additional criminal charges for the attack on Avery. That's the part that still sits wrong with me on certain nights. It's the gap between what happened and what justice would have looked like if the system had worked the way it was supposed to. I've made my peace with that gap, not because it doesn't matter, but because the alternative was spending the rest of my life trying to close it, and Avery needed her father present more than she needed me consumed. She graduated from Whitfield in May of 2024. She walked across the stage in a black gown, and she found me in the crowd afterward, and she hugged me longer than she had since she was small. She's in her first year of law school now. She told me last fall that she wants to work in civil rights litigation, specifically Title IX cases. She said, "I want to be the person who makes sure it costs them something." She said it matter-of-factly, the way she says most things, with that quiet certainty she built herself. I told her she was going to be very good at it. She asked me once, just once, about a year after everything had settled, whether I had done what she thought I had done. She didn't ask it with judgment in her voice. She asked it the way she asks most things, straight, eyes level, waiting for the truth. I looked at her for a moment. I said, "I did everything I could for you." She nodded slowly. She looked out the window for a few seconds. Then she looked back at me and she said, "I know. We haven't talked about it since. We don't need to. There are things that exist between a parent and a child that don't require words. An understanding that passes through something quieter than language. What I did because there was no other option left, and because she is my daughter, and because some promises you make without ever saying them out loud. I don't regret it. I've examined that carefully and honestly the way I examine everything, and I don't. I regret the years I was absent. I regret that she had to go through what she went through at all. I regret that the system required what it required before the people responsible faced any consequence at all. But I don't regret what I did when everything else had been exhausted. I came home from places where the rules didn't apply, and men made decisions that never made it into any official record. I came home carrying the weight of all of it, the things that were justified and the things that kept me awake, and I tried to set most of that down and live a smaller, quieter life, and I mostly did. I built something with my daughter from nothing, across the distance that my choices had created. And it cost both of us, and we did it anyway. And when the moment came that all of that training, all of that experience, all of those years of learning how to do hard things in hard circumstances, when all of that converged on a single purpose, which was protecting my child, I did not hesitate, not for 1 second. People ask me sometimes, not often, but sometimes, whether I think what happened was fair, whether the outcome was proportionate, whether justice in the end actually looked like justice. I've thought about that question more carefully than most people would expect, and here's what I've come to understand. Fairness isn't distributed evenly in this life. It never has been. What gets distributed evenly is consequence. Eventually, and usually in the precise shape of the choices that preceded it. Aldridge grew up in a world that told him his family's money was a ceiling that couldn't be reached by anyone below him. He made his choices from inside that belief, and the consequences came in exactly the form his choices had built for them. That's not mystical. That's not fate. That's just the mechanics of how things actually work when you strip away the noise. Clifton Aldridge spent 2 decades building a political career on the assumption that influence was permanent. He called me on a Tuesday night thinking I was a variable he could manage. He had no framework for what I actually was, because his entire life had been spent in rooms where every variable was manageable. That assumption was the flaw in his architecture. Every structure built on a flawed assumption eventually meets the load it can't carry. What I want people to take from Avery's story, from what she went through and what she refused to let break her, is this. Character is the only asset that compounds over time without losing value. Avery went back to that campus with a fractured cheekbone and a retainer holding her teeth together, and she sat in her classes and she did her work. Not because she wasn't afraid, not because she didn't cost her something every single day, but because she had built enough internal structure to hold herself upright when everything external had failed her. That kind of strength doesn't come from circumstances. It comes from choices, repeated over time, until they become the person you are. Intelligence matters. I believe that completely. The ability to think clearly under pressure, to gather information before acting, to understand that patience is a tactic and not a surrender. All of that matters enormously. But intelligence without integrity is just a more sophisticated way to cause harm. What made the difference in everything that followed wasn't that I was trained in ways most people aren't. It was that I used that training in service of something true. The file I built, the calls I made, the information I placed in the right hands. None of that works if the underlying purpose is wrong. Purpose determines whether your capabilities build something or destroy it. Avery is in law school now. She told me she wants to take cases that other people think are unwinnable. She said it the way she says everything, quietly, without performance, like a fact she'd already settled with herself. I didn't tell her how proud I was in the moment. I'm not always good at saying things like that out loud in real time. But I'm saying it here. She is the best evidence I have that people can be shaped by hard things without being defined by them. She walked through something that would have ended a lot of people's stories, and she came out the other side with a clearer sense of who she is and what she intends to do about it. That's the whole thing, really. Not the men who got what they earned, not the senator who discovered that influence has a shelf life, not even the institutional machinery that eventually bent under the weight of its own corruption. The whole thing is a young woman who refused to let them write her ending. Everything else was just the world catching up to what she'd already decided.